You're listening to episode 286 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Harrison Blum joins us to speak about diversity, inclusion, and equity with his Mindfulness Allies project. Hi, everyone. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to mention that this podcast and the supporting website, discussion forums, our live online practice circle, and other services provided by the Secular Buddhist Association are supported by you. If you find this episode or any other offerings helpful to you in some way, I ask that you take a moment and visit secularbuddhism.org and click on the contributions button. There are many ways you can help, which are listed on that page, and if you make a donation, it's tax deductible and helps ensure the SBA is able to continue the exploration of secular Buddhism. Thank you. We're glad to have you join us on the conversation. There's a lot of discussion lately about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our Buddhist communities. There isn't adequate representation in popular media of the large number of Asian Buddhists in the U.S., intersectionality isn't understood. People of color groups may be accused of missing the point of no self-ideals, instead of addressing the very real concerns faced by those not benefiting from institutionalized white privilege. Other hurdles to engaging with Buddhist communities exist too, like cost, travel, childcare. Taking the extra steps to meet people where they are in all aspects of their complex life circumstances can be difficult and still needs to be done. Harrison Blum is at Emerson College as Director of Religious and Spiritual Life and Campus Chaplain. From 2013 to 2016, he served as the Buddhist Spiritual Advisor and the Mindfulness Program Director at Northeastern University, as well as Staff Chaplain at Franciscan Children's, where he taught mindfulness meditation to adolescent patients on an acute psychiatric unit. Harrison received a Master of Divinity focused on Buddhist ministry from Harvard Divinity School and a Master of Education from Lesley University's Creative Arts in Learning program. He is a board-certified chaplain and a community Dharma leader in the insight meditation tradition of Theravada Buddhism and is committed to increasing mindfulness equity, equal access to mindfulness training across potential barriers based on race or class. His presentations on mindfulness equity and Buddhist chaplaincy include Oxford University, Harvard's Medical and Divinity Schools, and the International Symposium for Contemplative Studies, and he is the editor of Dancing with Dharma, Essays on Movement and Dance in Western Buddhism. So sit back, relax, and have a nice sleepy time tea. Our guest today is Harrison Blum. Harrison, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Hi, Ted.
So let's dive right in and just have you tell us about your background and work.
So I was highly shaped by my experience with the Community Dharma Leader Program out of Spirit Rock. It was the fourth iteration of that program. And if you look at the previous three iterations plus the three dedicated practitioner programs, a somewhat similar 2-year program out of Spirit Rock, the average participation by people of color was 6% across those 6 previous programs. The fourth community Dharma leader, 38%. So quite by design, the participants as well as the teaching team, notably Larry Yang and Gina Sharp, people of color, it was really designed to bring in a more diverse group and to talk about how do we teach Dharma in the West? How do we teach it outside of meditation centers? How do we partner with marginalized populations? And so while I was studying and learning and growing in that program and also doing a Master of Divinity program at Harvard, when it came time to do my thesis, I really wanted to put into action some of the theological and ministerial learnings and also the community Dharma leader, mindfulness teaching, Buddhist leadership mentoring that I had been experiencing. So something in the world, something active, something reaching people who otherwise did not have access to mindfulness teaching. That was some of the source of my originating the Mindfulness Allies project.
And then from that, your Master of Divinity thesis, I want you to say a little bit about that. And I will be providing a link to that for folks who are listening, who are interested. I'll be linking that on the episode page. But Harrison, tell us about the thesis itself.
Sure. So, I mean, some of it, like most research papers, was justifying the needs. So, talking about race in class in the United States, talking about higher percentages of people of color living in low socioeconomic status, more likely to be incarcerated, the connection between stress and doctor visits and shortened lifespan. Also putting what data I could gather out there about who is meditating. There's one interesting study from about 10 years ago. The point was to look at how often people who meditate recycle, trying to look at the sustainability efforts of those who meditate and whether there's a correlation. An interesting piece of data provided by that study is that people who meditate, about 800 people, mainly on the West Coast, they were earning incomes that were far above the average of that year. I think they were earning 70 to 80,000 a year, while the mean income for that year was about 45,000. 3/4 of that group had received graduate degrees or completed some part of graduate school, which is far above the general population. So just looking at things like who's meditating, who has access, what's going on throughout our country in terms of demographics, and then trying to justify a model to bring mindfulness to those, like a single mother who came to one of my classes who said, I've wanted to go down the street and learn how to meditate for years. I've known there's a meditation center. I could never do it because I need to be with my children. I need to provide dinner. So it really was something, I mean, I could say as simple as not charging for the class, having someone provide childcare, and gathering for a simple home-cooked meal after the meditation class. That was all she needed to follow through on her interest in meditation.
So say a bit more about that. So you just mentioned a few of the very important hurdles that people run into in doing meditation practice or even just starting and learning about it. And that includes, there's often a require for affluence. You need to have the money to pay for these more expensive programs, which can be very expensive to some people. You need to have transportation there. You need childcare. Right. It's more than just providing a scholarship. There are a whole bunch of ancillary hurdles for people to overcome. I'm wondering if you can say a bit more about that, what you did to help address some of these and what they were.
So certainly the financial requirements of a retreat, and not even to mention the childcare or do you have the vacation time? Can you take the time off? Those are large. Definitely they are being addressed. There are more and more scholarships, particularly for specific demographics coming out of places like Spirit Rock and IMS. There's great work being done, and I really do applaud it. And I think there's just an inherent limitation of who's going to go, knowing that they're entering a Buddhist space. And great work is done to make these spaces open to many people. And I think I can at least speak on behalf of the Insight meditation tradition within which I have trained and practiced and a little bit have taught. So while great work is being done to welcome more people in the doors, some people are just not going to be interested in entering a Buddhist center, no matter how welcoming it is. And so I think the big shift of MAP beyond free childcare, dinners, and classes is that I'm going to meet people where they are. I'm partnering with a community center that's already serving under-resourced people. The mission of the community center is to service low-income people of the neighborhood. So instead of saying, come over here, it's, putting the shoes back on, leaving the Dharma Center and going, in this case, less than half a mile from a local Buddhist center.
So I'm wondering, how that ended up manifesting with people showing up at a place they were perhaps already going or already associating with. What did it look like when you started the program? How many people showed up, and were you actually getting participation from folks that you were hoping to get involved with this?
Absolutely. 55% of the class attendees were people of color, and more than half of them self identified as making less than $15,000 a year. So this is very low socioeconomic status. Children were brought with the adults. Childcare was utilized every session. So what it looked like once it was in action, the first session, the first summer pilot, about 10 people in a room sitting in a circle, and two out of the 10 people literally broke down sobbing, confessing about how difficult their lives were, how stressful they were, how tough it was to make ends meet. And so thankfully, I did have some pastoral care training, and I had been working in critical care hospital context. And so had some familiarity and ability, I think, to hold space and not just to focus on the person who did, of course, need acknowledgement and validating, but to keep the session moving, because as important as validating and empathizing with that one person was, there was 9 other people around the table who in good faith had showed up to meditate. So being able to give some time and attention to that particular moment, and also saying, I'm going to ask you to find a pause. We are going to keep moving. It's good that you're bringing your whole self, and we did come here to meditate. We'll be tying this all together. So really trying to hold space for everyone equally. But I was just very impressed. I was struck. It was impressed upon me how much of a need there was for space, for allowing emotions, for guiding and providing some skills into how to be with what's very difficult, maybe pausing the agenda to try to improve it as we do in mindfulness practice.
So, how did it progress throughout the program? What occurred then? Did you see some changes? What are some of the stories you might be willing to share from the project that were moving to you?
Sure. People staying for dinners and really bonding over the food. I would cook some big Italian meals and bike with 2 big bags on either of my bicycle handlebars down the street, which was part of making it work financially. And people giving each other a ride home afterwards, doing a little bit of creative movement and dance, which I love to do, and that further breaking the ice and getting us to laugh and connect. I was also struck by a question one woman asked at the first class, and she asked something like, "Are you going to teach this meditation in a spiritual kind of way? Is this spiritual stuff that we're up to?" And I said, I'd love to just not answer that question. Have you answer that at the end. And she weighed in. I asked her at the last class, and she said, it wasn't you didn't provide a religious tone, but I really do feel more connected to my soul than I have in many years. And other people saying things on the feedback forums like, I feel like this is the first step in trying to love myself, which I've been trying to do for 50 years, or I have a better relationship with my chronic pain. Or one person just saying, I'm able to follow through and show up at my doctor visits. Usually I would skip half of them. Now I'm actually showing up to see the doctor. And many other really, really beautiful, heartfelt expressions of benefit.
So, one of the things that you mentioned briefly was just making it work financially, because the programs don't poof into existence. They do require resources and time, and often there's volunteering, certainly, for example, your own time and putting it together. What are some of the other ways in which this program was supported just financially or through donations of space and time? How did that work to make sure that this could be offered to people at all?
Sure. So I did keep careful track. It took about 45 hours of volunteer time. I did provide all that time for the first summer, and then I was able to give a very modest stipend to a Spanish English translator for the second summer. I did pay, I forget what it was, maybe $15 an hour for childcare. I furnished a parting gesture of the book, The Power of Now, to each person, and also gave resources, yes, to a local Buddhist center, but also to centering prayer, mindfulness-based stress reduction. I really wanted this not to come off as a Buddhist teaching, but something that was open to all faith traditions. On that topic of plurality and ecumenical space, one story I love is that one of the women in the class invited me to teach a mindfulness workshop to the lay outreach ministers of her local Pentecostal church. And I was just delighted by that I could grow up Jewish, be practicing Buddhism for close to 20 years and then be invited into an evangelical Christian space where I did teach an hour of mindfulness. And then these people in a survey were saying that it was very likely that these mindfulness skills would help them in their own Christian work with their community. So that's exactly the type of interfaith, intercommunity connection and support that I would hope MAP could lead to. And on the finance bit, I will flesh out as well that it costs between $350 and $400 each series to provide 4 to 5 classes once a week that include paying for childcare and dinners, Spanish English translation, the power of now. I think I might have given a $10 Target gift card for filling out the final questionnaire. So not that much money when we're talking about local meditation centers with an operating annual budget of over $100,000.
So I'm wondering, what are some of the other hurdles other than just the finance and the time that you've been working with as you build MAP and offer the programs?
So I've been thinking about that. I'm trying to understand what the obstacles are. I think one of them is perhaps a reluctance on the part of Buddhist centers to engage in teaching that is not strictly Buddhist. And I've come to respect that. I am a big fan of particular mindfulness teaching. I don't think it's exactly worth getting too cerebral or intellectual about what does it mean to teach mindfulness outside of a Buddhist context. It's a useful question, but one that I don't think should paralyze us. The Buddha classically taught, as I understand it, not to provide teachings unless invited to. And so while respecting that, I think that when we're seeing documented stress-induced illness and higher mortality and incarceration rates suffered at the hands of racism and poverty, I think that is more than the invitation that we need. I think we can also look to the 5 precepts, the second one, not to steal, but then when interpreted more positively, the kind of mandate to be generous and share resources. Another hesitation or obstacle could be that Dharma centers, Buddhist centers already have in place certain community service projects. And that's wonderful. I'm not saying that mindfulness is going to put food on the table. However, I think that Buddhist centers have something unique. They have an inner practice, something that's been demonstrated to reduce stress, improve immune system functioning, a host of other positive outcomes. So I think we're selling ourselves short and our communities short if we don't offer the exact and central gift or practice that we gather to cultivate. I've been also thinking that perhaps a third and more important obstacle, and a legitimate one, is that simply that Buddhist centers just might not be there yet, that there's a kind of necessary process of becoming woke, especially for largely white, somewhat or largely affluent centers. For example, with my local center, I pitched the idea of partnering with me, even just nominally, or maybe giving me $400 to do a summer pilot series. And that did not happen. And I think, maybe that was for the best. I was disappointed, but that was at the point I pitched this partnership. I think that was 3 years before the center offered their first formal white awareness training in the center. So maybe Dharma centers do need to go in the correct order of, often it's a people of color group first, and then the white people realize, hey, we have something to do in this work too. Let us look at our own white privilege. And then maybe once all those conversations are happening in affinity groups and together, the center's in a place to partner with, if it is a largely people of color, low socioeconomic status community, which is quite often in the neighborhood, especially urban Dharma centers. You don't have to go far to find a potential community organization to partner with.
So tell us about the eMindful at Emerson, noting that's different than the other eMindfuls.
I've been at Emerson almost 1 year as their director of religious and spiritual life and campus chaplain. And not unlike many other colleges, there is a high level of stress. There can be some high anxiety in the student experience. So providing not only religious programming, but spiritual, emotional, mental well-being practices is an important part of, as I see it, of my mandate as a campus chaplain. In mindfulness meditation, I believe, is a wonderful way to gather religious, non-religious, spiritual students for this specific practice. So eMindful is meant to be a multi-tiered approach to supporting students to develop their own practice of mindfulness. A couple offerings. One is a weekly yoga class, 3 different guided meditations each week that are drop-in, no need to register or pay, just show up. Also a new program called the Mindfulness Practitioner Program, which is a 8-week largely self-directed program. Students at Emerson are busy doing wonderful things, a lot of creative performance and video projects, writing projects, journalism, and there's not always the time to show up for 1 hour each week. The Mindfulness Practitioner program starts with a 1 hour in-person training in mindfulness. Then I give them a book and I assign a bit of reading, 10 to 20 pages of reading a week, 10 to 20 minutes of guided audio online meditations each week. And they're able to go at their own pace. I do ask them to respond to 3 questions each week. What's stuck out to you from the reading? What's been challenging for practice this week? And what's been positive? And those sharings have been so heartfelt. Often, someone sharing that they've had one of the most stressful weeks of the whole semester is also saying that when they've paused to meditate, they really know themselves, they love themselves, there's a spaciousness there. So certainly there are obstacles to getting something like MAP going. I think some of the potential is that it's quite flexible. There are the outlines. It talks about the curriculum in terms of having training beyond just mindfulness, whether that's feminism or anti-racist practices. It talks about ideal partnership components between the Dharma or meditation center and the community organization. It also talks about the teacher themselves, their kind of how they hold the space. So it's a model that can, I think, be applied to many types of organizations, to many types of partnerships. And happily, there are people asking for more info, asking to have some mentorship, some supervision as they implement this themselves. From the tricycle interview I did a few months ago, there's been emails and phone calls I've had with people in Montreal and Toronto, the UK, Austin, Texas, South Carolina. And so, as I believe I mentioned in that article, I think it would just take 3 or 4 people or 6 people would be wonderful to say, I'd like to use some of these principles, try it out. And one of the process guidelines for MAP is to measure it in some way so that the impact, the benefit can be understood, reflected upon, and shared. So I would just invite anyone who is interested to look at the MAP guiding principles and reach out and let me know if you're interested or if you do run something similar so that we can collectively kind of move the ball forward on bringing mindfulness out into the world and increasing mindfulness equity.
So you've also edited a book, Dancing with Dharma. I'd like to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit as well.
Great. So Dancing with Dharma was a 6-year-long labor of love. And the result, I'm happy to say, is 27 authors from 6 countries writing about all the ways that their Buddhist practice or teaching, many of them are Buddhist teachers, is wedded to a movement or a dance practice. And there's a Buddhist nun in there, master teachers, Reggie Ray is in there. There are professional choreographers, dance movement therapists, chaplains. So it's quite a mix of occupations and roles that people are writing from. And the sections are movement, dance, performance, and theory. And one of the last sections, guided practices, really takes your hand and guides you through some of the earlier modalities that are explained. So the reader not only can be interested in what they're seeing other people doing, but can actually live through and practice through some of this themselves.
Harrison, is there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners about your work?
Thank you. I do want to mention one other aspect of eMindful at Emerson, which is an emerging partnership with the largest day shelter in New England called St. Francis House. I think it's over 500 people a day access resources there, and about 50 to 60 people do live there on the top floors. They pay rent. All residents are formerly homeless themselves. And for about 6 months, I've been teaching a weekly meditation class there that at the moment students are starting to join me, specifically students who are taking a course at Emerson that's focused on power and privilege. So the idea is that students, for their volunteer capacity of that course, are not only sorting clothes or serving food, but they are going to these meditation classes with me, connecting with the residents, talking about our shared experience of breathing, of having body sensations, of trying to manage stress. And so being half a block away, it's a way to connect St. Francis House and Emerson College.
Great. Thank you so much. Our guest today, Harrison Blum. You can find out more about his work. We'll be linking to the Mindfulness Allies Project, as well as his book, Dancing with Dharma. Harrison, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ted.
thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.